Hello.
Hi, Mary, I'm here. Mary?
This is Gary.
Yeah, I know. Gary, I'm your facilitator for this session today. And Gary, I do not have your slides. Did you send them or?
No, I don't have any slides. I do have a photograph that I'd like to share, but I can't figure out how to get it into my share box.
Do you know how to share your screen? If not, if you send me the photograph, I could put it up for you.
Okay, hang on a second. Not sure how to share the screen. How do you do that?
Okay, so you can't do it yet because you're not a presenter. I have to wait for Mary to give me access. But up at the top next to the leave button, there is a little arrow, and you click that arrow and then you should see your desktop open at the bottom.
Michelle, you should be a presenter now.
Okay, all right, I'm going to make everybody presenters. Okay, it looks like everybody already is presenters. Mary, did you make everybody presenters? make an attendee. Greg, make an attendee. Okay. So Gary, if you go up to the top of the.
I've got my photo in the share box now, so I'm assuming all I have to do is click on it to share it?
No. No. No, you have to share your computer screen. You have to physically share your screen.
Okay. How do I do that?
Okay, hold on a second. So up at the top where there's well, you know what? I'm going to share my screen and I'll show you how to do it.
Oh, that'll help.
Okay. Okay, so you see my screen?
Nope.
You don't see my screen?
No.
Are you using the app or are you using the web version?
I'm using Microsoft Teams. I guess it's the web version. It's what UC sponsors.
Okay, so if you minimize, one way to do this, Gary, is if you minimize, what are you seeing right now?
Well, I just minimized. GV in a big circle.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I've got 1140 on that little bar and the camera and microphone thing and the box with the arrow for closing share tray. I got the share tray open at the bottom, which has a few things well, it's got three things. The team screen on there twice, I'm not sure why, but also the photograph that I want to share.
Well, what you need to do to share it is next to the leave button, there is a little box with an arrow in it. And when it's your turn, you click that button and you have you actually have already clicked it, it looks like.
Yeah.
And you should just click on the photograph and it'll pop up on the screen. So try that now. Click on the photograph.
Just did. What do
Okay,
you
I'm
see?
seeing the photograph. Yep.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
That's all you need to do when you want to share that photo. But now I need you to unshare, okay?
Okay. Stop sharing.
All right, great. Good.
Do you
All right,
want
Greg, I'm
want
sorry, Gary.
Do you want us on camera now, or do you want mute camera, mute microphone?
Mute everything until we get started.
Okay.
Okay. Greg, I do have your slides, so we're good there. Lucy, I do not have your slides.
Oh, they were the same ones that I had sent, back when we did the test. I can just share my screen.
Okay, you know how to do it, because that's the only reason I need the slides is if something goes wrong on your end.
Let's see. This it looks like it's different. Should I send it to you real quick?
Yeah, that would be good, just to have it as a backup. Just send it to me in an email. You ready?
Okay. Yes.
It's MORRONE at ohio.edu.
Oh, okay. I'm in Ohio also.
Okay. So you send those to me, and then for you to, then I'll explain to you how to share so you can give it a try.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, I need to let you know that we're going to change the order and this session. And Evelyn's actually did a pre-recording, and she's going to go last because her pre-recording is a little long, and I don't want to I can't cut off the recording. I don't want to cut off the recording. So the session may go over a little bit. So Lucy, you'll be first, then Gregory, then Gary, and then I'll do the recording with Evelyn.
Okay.
So did you email those to me?
No, I'm still trying to find it.
Can I go ahead and test mine?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, Greg.
So
Gregory or Greg?
Just Greg.
Okay.
So if I do, okay, I clicked on open share tray. Okay, that no, it didn't. I
I'm
can't.
seeing your screen. I'm seeing your screen. There you go. I'm seeing it.
So then, okay, so it's good then.
Yep.
And then I can just advance here.
Yep.
And you see it. All right. So, okay, I'm used to Zoom, not Microsoft Teams. That's
I know and this is very different, and in a lot of ways, it's a lot more clunky than Zoom. But once I mean, that's all we've been teaching with, so it's like, it's nothing to me anymore.
And
but,
now, okay, there we go. Yeah. So yeah, so it's just a slightly different interface there. So but that's it. And if something goes wrong, you can step in and
right.
slap me through the screen.
Uh-huh. Well, I have your slides, so I can put them up.
Okay, so it should be fine. So I have it open here, and I'll do that, and I'll go second. And mine should be on time. It's going to be 13 to 15. That's what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it should be about that. So it won't be too long.
Okay.
And how's the structure? I have class afterwards. What's the structure of this present? It's going to be the three of us, and then the fourth is pre-recorded. And is there still a question and answer after that?
No, we'll do the question and answer, time permitting, right after your presentation.
Okay, each one individually. Okay.
Yeah.
And then will it just be a chat that you'll tell me what's going through? And
there is a chat. Yeah. And so if people want to, talk about, have a comment or a question, I'll be monitoring the chat.
Okay. All right. And okay. And then we should be muted with cameras off and
that'd be good.
Everything.
Yep. How we doing, Lucy?
Okay, I did email it to you.
I got it.
Okay.
So do you want me to share your slides, or are you going to do it?
If you want to do it, that's fine.
Okay.
It's not, it's not geared towards the talk. I just wanted I wanted people to see the image. And I think I only have 3 or 4 images.
There's 5.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll put them up, and then when it's your turn, and then we'll just, you just let me know when to advance. But right now I'm going to put up the title slide, so that as people are adding or coming in, they know what session they're in.
Okay.
So you should see the title slide, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so Lucy, you're going to go first, and as soon as I welcome everybody in and explain a little bit of logistics, I'll put your slides up, and then you can start. And I'll be monitoring the chat as well. Okay.
Okay.
And I'll give all Gary and Greg and Lucy, I'll give you a 1-minute warning at about the 15-minute mark, because you technically have about 17 minutes and change, with some time for some questions.
Okay.
Okay.
This was 12 minutes when I tried it out, but
all right.
But you never know. Things slow down. So I'm just hoping.
I know.
My cats bring me a mouse again, like they did yesterday when I was in a zoo.
Oh, nice.
Now, can you hear me all right, or do I need to use? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. So, and I'm actually at Bowling Green University.
Oh, are you?
About 3 hours from you. It's like the complete opposite of Appalachian.
Yeah, it really is the flatlands, right? My husband actually is from up that way. He's from near Toledo, out near Metamora is where he went to high school, out in Evergreen High School in Metamora.
Okay, yeah, I know that area. And I'm from North Carolina. I'm from the mountains down there.
So this is really something, huh?
Well, and it's, the concept of region is based on contrast. So
right.
I definitely get the contrast up here.
I remember going up there for the first time. It was really amazing that everything was like, to go around the block, you went a mile, turn right, you went a mile, turn right, went a mile, turn right, went a mile, turn right. It was pretty crazy.
I know, and every summer, I take my kids, we'd all go back to North Carolina. At least, we stay there for or usually at least a month and a half, trying to get my accent back and all. And I remember driving back, driving up 75. It's so dismal. You get into Cincinnati and it's just industrial, and then you finally get past Dayton, and then it's just so bland and all. And I would drive back, just like, I'm leaving the mountains behind. And one of my kids pointed out, but Mom, look at the sunset. We don't have the mountains, but the sunsets, the sky is so big.
Have you been in Bowling Green a long time?
I've been here 30 years.
Oh, okay. But you still have connections to North Carolina.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of my family is down there. We still have my grandfather's house. Well, we have one up in Ashe County, and then one outside of Asheville, over in Black Mountain. So I get to go down there a lot.
That's great. Well, we have about 7 minutes, so you can just take a quick, take a breath, and we'll get started right on time at 12:30.
Okay. So should I turn off?
Yeah, you can turn off. You can mute and turn off your video for now until we're ready to get started.
Okay.
Michelle, you good?
I am ready to roll. We've tested everything, so we're ready to go. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 12:30 session of the first day of what's a phenomenal ASA conference already. We have 4 presentations today. I did make a note in the chat that we are switching the order, in the Nursing in Rural Appalachia, which is a pre-recorded presentation, will be last today. So we just needed to do that just to make sure that we have enough time to get everyone in. So we are going to start this afternoon session with Lucy Long, and I'm asking all the presenters just to give a quick introduction of themselves. Each presenter has about 15 minutes for the presentation, and I'll let y'all know when you're at that time, or about a minute before. And time permitting, we'll have questions right after each presentation. Please feel free to liberally use the chat if you have comments or questions. I will monitor the chat, and I can read questions or comments after each presenter is done. So without further ado, let us go ahead and get started. I'm getting Lucy's slides ready. Okay, Lucy, you can open your mic and get started.
Okay, I think I'm on fully. Okay, the title of my paper is Apple Stack Cake, Tradition, Myth, and Icon in Constructing an Appalachian Cuisine. Also, I want to mention I'm the director of an independent nonprofit, the Center for Food and Culture, which promotes a humanities-based understanding of food and culture. I also teach at Bowling Green State University in American Culture Studies and Ethnic Studies and Folklore, as well as nutrition and tourism. So, and I am from North Carolina originally, and so part of the impetus for this paper is my own experience or lack of experience with this particular cake. Okay, Appalachian food has frequently been stereotyped in popular media, commercial marketing, and artistic forms as backwards and backwoods. These stereotypes evoke the hillbilly images of the region as made up of people who are simple-minded, uneducated, oftentimes mentally, as well as morally deficient. I'm sure you can all imagine some of those stereotypical caricatures of hillbillies with the moonshine jug. Over the last decade and a half, however, there has been a shift in public presentations of Appalachian food that connote more positive images, those of wholesomeness, community-mindedness, self-reliance, and sustainable coexistence with natural resources. This in turn suggests a shift in the public imagination of Appalachian culture to one that is not only attractive, but also admirable and worthy of emulation. Apple Stack Cake, I suggest here. Let's see. Do I have any control over the slides?
No, you don't. You want me to? You just let me know. I'll advance.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. You can advance through all of these.
Okay.
And then end up on the last one. Okay, so this is stack cake. This is one of the foods that is playing a role in this shift, and it is being used, not intentionally, to promote this more positive perception of the region. A multi-layer cake sharing origins with European pastries that is distinctive to the region in its ingredients, cooking methods, and perhaps associated memories. Okay, yeah, and then let's just sit on there. Okay, Splendid Table on NPR. Okay, so Kentucky Apple Stack Cake. Okay, so this essay explores the role of stack cake in Appalachian food culture and in the popular perceptions of that culture. I'm not interested here debunking it as as fake lore, but I'm interested in how it is perceived by insiders and outsiders and what those perceptions imply about the position of Appalachia in the public imagination. I propose that it can be understood simultaneously as a folk tradition, one that does exist in variation throughout the region, although not among everyone within the region. It is a myth in the sense of a narrative carrying ultimate truths that need not be based in fact, and it is an icon, a publicly recognized, oftentimes venerated symbol representing an idea, It can also, I think, be considered a heritage food. Okay, so first, as a tradition, a folk tradition is a set of practices, products, and concepts that are usually transmitted informally, but regardless of origin, exist in variation that reflect individual cooks' identity, circumstances, and resources. Stack cake definitely fits the definition. Even the name itself comes in variants. Apple stack cake, Appalachian stack cake, Tennessee apple stack cake, old fashioned, and so on. The essential part is stack and cake. Okay, now structurally, apple stack cakes are multi-layered cakes with any number of layers from 2 to 9, even 11 and 13. The layers, though, are made of usually a cookie-like type of dough, made usually from wheat flour, that is traditionally sweetened with either blackstrap molasses or sorghum molasses, although some recipes call for brown sugar. It is usually spiced with ginger, maybe some cinnamon, cloves, or nothing at all. It usually uses baking soda as its rising agent. However, recipes are extremely varied in that way. The dough is then divided into multiple thin layers and is baked ideally in a cast iron skillet or freestanding. Okay, although of course some recipes are calling for cake pans. These layers are then sandwiched together, most commonly with sort of a compote made from ideally home-dried apples. Okay, although all sorts of substitutions are also suggested. Okay, so that once the layers are stacked on top, the cake can be topped with boiled icing, sugar glaze, powdered sugar, or left plain. A distinctive feature is that the cake needs to be left for a day or more to let the juices saturate the layers. Okay, and that keeps the layers from being too hard. Okay, these variations reflect the flexibility of the recipe and what cooks could use. That cooks could use whatever resources were available. They could also fit their different taste. Okay, this suggests that this definitely is a folk tradition in the scholarly sense of the word. Okay, secondly, as a myth, part of the appeal of the stack cake is a story attached to it describing it as a wedding cake. This story came out in 1983 when Sidney Saylor Farr, an archivist at Berea College and a native of Appalachia, published an article and recipe that told how it was used for weddings, and that due to poverty, every family would bring a layer. Those would then be stacked up together to make a tall cake for the bridal couple. Okay, and the bride's family would make the filling and they would put them all together. Okay, now the story caught the imagination of other cookbook writers and tourism promoters, journalists, who then repeated it, oftentimes adding their own twist. And people have tried to debunk the story. And Ronnie Lundy, Mark Sohn, Sherry Castle, they all point out that this would not have worked. However, it has continued. So, and I think it's important that it has continued. It undergoes a shifting of narrative genres that reflects the teller's attitudes towards its truthfulness. So first it was presented as historical fact. And then other authors challenge its accuracy, say, no, this is a folktale. This is completely fiction. Okay, but then other authors started repeating the story, framing it as a legend, as a narrative that could have happened, but the truthfulness is questionable. So they would say things like, people say that this happened. Okay, and then the story has now taken on the qualities of a myth, which in the folkloric sense, is a narrative that holds universal truths, even though the characters, settings, and events might be fiction. So whether or not this custom actually happened is irrelevant, since it represents an image of traditional Appalachian culture that residents consider accurate, that of resourcefulness, generosity, and community-mindedness. The mythic part of the story is why it is repeated so often. It affirms certain truths that people want to believe about themselves. Okay, now thirdly, as an icon, Mark Sohn in his influential 2005 cookbook book on Appalachian food called Apple Stack Cakes a mountain icon. Others also use that description, both insiders and outsiders. And I think the term itself is significant. The Oxford Dictionary defines icon as a person or thing regarded as a representative symbol or as worthy of veneration. We have already seen that as a myth, stack cake can be considered symbolic of Appalachia and representative of certain qualities felt to define it. The concept of icon takes its role a step further, in that the icon itself is venerated, which then means in turn that the thing being represented is also venerated. As an icon, stack cake is treated as something to be respected and admired. And we see this in social media and recipes that are being published in magazines. The culture it represents then is also an object of respect and admiration, at least as the food culture is. So these presentations of stack cake raises that food culture, Appalachian food culture, from the folk foods of a simple people too down to earth or too busy to be introspective about what they eat. It raises it from that perception to that of cuisine. That is a set of ingredients, cooking styles, and ethos that reflects sophisticated, refined, thoughtful cooking that takes a certain amount of culinary dexterity and training and experience. It is a cuisine that is characterized by qualities considered desirable according to trends in current American food culture. So Appalachian cuisine is being seen now as natural, local, organic, communal, yet still adaptable to each individual's taste, needs, and resources. This in turn applies those characteristics to Appalachian culture in general, presenting it as not only attractive, but also admirable and worthy of emulation. This presentation of stack cake is both creating and reflecting the shift in the public imagination of Appalachia. Rather than being on the margins of mainstream America, it is now being seen as a place where the ideals and values of the nation have resided all along. They're perhaps hidden and exploited by outsiders. Apple stack cake, thus, has become a heritage food, iconic of this recent reimagining of the past in order to fit the present, to adapt Barbara Kimblett's definition of heritage. This newer perception of identity is a more positive one, and it definitely has its benefits. It is attracting dollars to local tourism, hospitality, and food businesses, and supporting environmentally conscious food production and distribution practices. However, we do need to ask some questions about it. It does tend to homogenize the region into one single monolithic culture, but also, who does it leave out? Who is included in this particular perception? And who is actually benefiting from this new perception of Appalachian cuisine? Okay, so I want to end with that question. You know, that this can be seen as something that is very positive in many ways. It is creating a positive image of Appalachia, which does have many very tangible, very, very real benefits. At the same time, though, we do need to look at the implications of that. So, thank you. I can open it now for questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, there is some time for some live questions. If anybody has a question or a comment or wants to share their recipe for apple stack cake, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, you can write a note in the chat, and I'll monitor the chat for a minute.
So, and I would definitely love to get people's own experiences. This is a dessert, you know, that you know, my father's family in Ashe County, you know, they were not familiar with it. I never saw it when I was growing up. I didn't see it when I was living in Watauga County or Buncombe County. So when I first heard about it, and I think like 2003 at an Appalachian Studies conference, and Mark Sohn was talking about it, you know, and saying, "Oh, this is the icon of Appalachian cuisine." And my response is, well, I consider myself Appalachian. I've never seen this. So, but, there are pockets of tradition of different practices, scattered throughout any region. So I don't want to just automatically say this is not an Appalachian tradition, but what are the implications of saying that something that is unfamiliar to me and to my family as Appalachians, that this does stand for all of Appalachia?
Right.
Okay.
That's a great question for us to ponder, I think. Well, I don't see any comments in the chat right now, but I'll keep monitoring it. And if you have a question and want to follow up with Lucy, that's the place to do it for right now. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next presentation, which is Greg. Are you ready, Greg?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, and so you can share your slides.
Okay.
There
Are you
you are.
seeing them now? Yep.
Yes, we are. Yep.
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay, you can proceed. Yeah.
Never follow a presentation on food. We're all hungry right now. That looks so wonderful. So my name is Greg Galford. I am an assistant professor of residential environments and design at Virginia Tech. I'm also a registered architect who worked for many years in practice. I'm a native of Southern West Virginia, and this is a description of a project that was to begin last summer. This time last year, I was getting started, and so now hopefully everything can be restarted again this summer. So this is the structure of the presentation, and it's basically how to frame future work. I want to begin with the purpose and the goals of the work, and then situate within context and sort of explain its relevance. Why do we care? Talk about the methods I hope to use and the expected findings that I'll put into a future paper, and then discuss implications for future work. So for me, the interest is rooted in a belief that housing needs in Appalachia should respond to the present situation and future needs. And this prompts a look back at where housing came from and what organizes, that's what organizes this presentation. So what are examples of planned housing in Appalachia and specifically West Virginia in this case, and how can we use that prior experience to frame work going forward? I'm working, and I'd be the first part of the process this summer, to survey those who live in such houses now that were built in the 1930s to see how those settlements inform a new generation of planned housing to address future family needs. And the items in blue are how I'm looking at each of the categories for this work. So my purpose within more detail is to look at three to four particular planned towns in West Virginia that represent different approaches and different reasons for new towns. I want to use diagrammatic models from sort of established historic urban design theories to look at these towns as a way that we, within that sort of design world that we can all understand. But what makes such towns unique to Appalachia? How does the history and the culture of the region impact how we design homes and neighborhoods? The distinction needs to be made between these towns and the history of company towns in the region. What's similar and what's different? So economic redevelopment in Appalachia, in whatever forms it takes over time, has to include housing. So I just feel like it's now time to begin that discussion. So in a sense, I'm looking at it both as an academic, but also as a practitioner. So that makes this work relevant, as its goal is to inform the next generation of rural housing needs. So for purposes of this presentation, planned housing refers to a housing development, neighborhood, or town that's designed, constructed, or financed by a governmental body. That makes it different than the company town, which is the standards for planned towns in the coal fields, and which we're all familiar with. This house is at Arthurdale, West Virginia, which is about 30 minutes from Morgantown. And it's from the mid-1930s. You'll see an adaptation of this house in a later slide. You can tour this house when you go to the community, and you can see what was built for these families in 1935 and was considered state of the art for housing for rural homesteads at the time. So for the purposes of this presentation, I want to use sort of existing urban design analytic models, and this is stuff I will apply to these towns. The most famous of these come from a book from 1960. So Kevin Lynch wrote this book in 1960. All architects, urban designers are very familiar with it, but it was a different book at the time, and it made a lot of a positive change. So it was a different way of seeing cities in a new way, not so much from a functional point of view, but for how we experience cities. So he enabled a whole generation of urban designers and architects and lay people to look at cities differently. He focused on these categories you see here of nodes, paths, districts, edges, and landmarks. And you can probably think of any town or city you're familiar with that you could start to analyze them in terms of these characteristics. And I want to adapt these techniques to look at these rural plan towns. So this is an example of a map he did for Boston. And the book also looks at Jersey City, New Jersey, and Los Angeles. So it's always been used as an urban design tool. And I'm interested in adapting that model to a rural model, and it provides sort of a visual graphic means of presenting what we find. So much of the study of housing in Appalachia is centered on the company town, and which is just much more prevalent. This is Crandall Shiflett's 1991 book on company towns, and it's a good starting point to look at how the company towns in Appalachia operated. So but this work, like I said, is looking at plan towns from a different perspective, and it's not really focused on the sort of capitalist industrial perspective of the company towns we're familiar with. So it's slightly a bit fuzzy there, but you can see the image of Eleanor Roosevelt. So the government planned housing for social reasons that I want to investigate, and it falls in a couple of other types as well. The previously mentioned company town is well known, but this study looks at other types. And one that deserves mention is actually the war-related town that was built for war material production. Nitro, West Virginia was built for nitroglycerin in World War I, and there were towns along the Ohio River Valley that were built out for World War II. But I'm kind of focused on the New Deal towns of the 1930s prior to the war. So in terms of relevance, significance, and the sort of theoretical frameworks, I'm looking at how to approach this work. I want to talk about, there's three I have listed here, and so one is sort of policy related and the others are design related. And I want to have a balance of those things within the work. So a theory of family housing adjustment was written by Morris and Winter in 1975, and folks that deal with housing policy seem to always be very familiar with this. And so it's really looking at the different variables of why families make the housing choices they actually make. As an architect, I tend to think that design plays a big role, but it's actually a lot of things that really affect how families actually make those decisions. So you can see here, so Morris and Winter looked at housing needs through family needs. They also incorporated cultural norms into their theory. And they said that families that are confronted with housing problems that no longer work for them usually fall into three categories. They move, they adapt the home to fit their needs, or they adapt the family to fit the house. And so this is one way I could start to look at how to evaluate the families who live in these towns, and then the families who left these towns but lived there for quite a while. Second framework to look at these towns is more from a design perspective, and it's more current. So the Congress for the New Urbanism, or the New Urbanism as it's known, comes about in the 1980s as a reaction to sort of post-war suburbia. It was led by architects and urban planners, and it inspired to bring back traditional homes and traditional neighborhoods that existed in American cities prior to World War II. It definitely has influenced significant new towns in the last 2 decades. But generally, these have been urban focused models, and they've been focused on upper middle income and upper class families who could afford the model. And the architecture within these towns, within new urbanist towns, is really generally very traditional. So some of the tenets of it, homes are scaled down. They always have porches. They're closer to the street. They always have sidewalks. And garages are typically at the rear of the property so that you never have a garage door facing the street. It uses traditional materials and traditional forms. Sometimes it's criticized because architecturally it's so conservative. But many older cities, previous to Virginia Tech, I was in Pittsburgh, and many older cities such as Pittsburgh, where I lived, were largely designed to this model. The things that were built in the first 30 years, first 40 years of the 20th century were often built this way. So, and then again, from small towns to more urban examples is this one in Alexandria. So new urbanism represents a traditional means of moving forward the model, and has a strong number of proponents. But again, how does this work with rural areas? And how do 1930s models of sustainable housing, which is what I'm investigating, compare with new urbanist models? So that's one way. Here's another design perspective. I think it raises some interesting questions about housing. Totally outside the US. So this is actually in Chile. Alejandro Aravena from Chile won the Pritzker Prize. So the Pritzker Prize is sort of the Nobel Prize of architecture. It's a big deal. He was the first architect from South America to ever win the prize. And he really won it for his work in housing. And so what he was known for in his work in affordable housing is he really introduced the variable of time into how we actually design and build homes. We typically think we design a house completely, it's all done, we build it, it's done, the family moves in, whatever. And he looked at it economically. What if a family can't afford the full house at this point? What if we provide them the framework in parts of the home, but we don't build the whole thing and let it evolve over time? So you can see the image at the top is actually what was built, and then over time, as people had the means, they started to fill in. They put added rooms, they added balconies, they added this and that, and it was okay, So it was an interesting way to think about how we address housing needs when we don't have all the financial means right up front to do it. And it's very much, as an architect, it's very different kind of way, and you have to give away control, but you have to be okay with that. But you wonder if that kind of model would work in a region such as Appalachia, where you might financially not have all the money up front, but you could evolve over time. And also with the unique topography we have, how could that model be integrated? But here's a model that actually was designed for rural areas. And so I just wanted to bring this up. This is actually this is from the Rural Studio at Auburn University, which is a graduate design build studio within our graduate architectural programs, where the students have to design and then go build housing and small community structures for rural parts of Alabama, and it was meant to, how can we bridge that divide between architectural design in rural areas where typically it goes to richer areas, urban areas, but how can we actually bring good design to folks with sustainable materials and with lower costs? And so again, and we have great architecture schools all around Appalachia. So I mean, there's no reason that couldn't be done in a similar way here, and I'm sure it is done in a limited way. And I think that ultimately we have to think about technology as a way to look at towns too. We have technology now we didn't have in the 1930s. So this is actually a 3D printer. You're used to a 3D printer printing out something rather small, but now you can scale it up, if you see in the lower left-hand corner there, where you can actually print out a house. It's actually printing out a house out of concrete. And so in one day they can build this, they can build a home. So how would these new technologies, this is from Austin, Texas, and I saw the presentation there. So ultimately, will new technologies allow us to think about housing in a different way as well? Can we afford things we couldn't afford before? So some of the methods I want to use for the work this summer and this fall, of course, this is the stuff within the presentation, but within the work afterwards, I'll probably start off with surveys and photographic observation and historical analysis of archival drawings. And then I hope to, in the fall, after initial analysis of the data, to do sort of qualitative interviews with some of the residents. And then ultimately lead to, to more than one paper about the topic and presentations, and I hope to bring it back next year and see what I found. But in this case, you can see that original house I showed you several slides ago. You can see an example here that's in the middle of this house, where they've added on the one end and they've added on a garage to the other end. So a lot of the houses have been adapted because family needs and family expectations have changed so dramatically since that time. So with expected findings, I predict to find that many towns have an existing urban fabric that can be repaired. They may be older towns and they may need infrastructure repairs, but and the housing stock may be older. However, they provide real opportunities for housing that blends with existing housing and can strengthen traditional towns. And I think, again, what are the unique challenges found in Appalachian small towns that new housing models can address?
You have about a minute, Greg, okay?
Yeah, I'm getting there. Yeah, I'm almost done. So family demographics are in flux. Housing needs need to meet the needs of the families that are there. Older populations need more aging in place strategies for housing. And manufactured housing is always part of the mix. But site placement as well, including floodplains, has to be taken into consideration. With implication, I think the time is right for better models for sustainable rural housing. All models have to work with regional differences, and we need to think about how to economically bring this about. And I hope to present findings at next year's conference in Morgantown to compare the goals presented here with what I actually found within the data collection and data analysis. And that is it.
Thank you, Greg. We have time for one live question. If anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can raise your hand, or you can make a note in the chat. Really interesting, Greg. I'm really thinking about the implications for communities that are kind of off the grid too, for this type of approach.
Well, and often with infrastructure, you think about the roads that have been built in Appalachia, it changes towns so much, it moves things. So how do we go back to those traditional towns and strengthen them?
There is a hand raised. Vanya, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Hi, how are you, Greg?
Good, how are you?
I'm well, thank you for asking. Have you identified properties already that I'm from West Virginia as well, Southern West Virginia. I live in Atlanta now, but I do a lot of work in West Virginia.
Yeah, so I've already been in talks with the folks at Arthurdale, West Virginia, which is actually up near Morgantown. So that's interesting because that's the Eleanor Roosevelt Plan community. There's actually communities in Putnam County in West Virginia and in Randolph County, West Virginia, the same time period, same house style. I haven't been in contact with those entities yet because they don't have the same organization, but that'll be part of that process. So I only have 3. But they're all New Deal plan towns. You can always tell because they have a root cellar behind the house. You see a mound behind every house, and there's underground root cellars. And so that type was built around the state.
All right, I'm going to have to cut you off. It sounds like that could be more conversation. Vanya, I'd encourage you to write some notes in the chat if you'd like to follow up. And then put your hand down too, or I'll keep calling on you. Gary, are you ready? Greg, you're not fully stopped sharing your screen. Make sure that you're completely stopped. There we go.
I'm ready.
Okay, Gary. John B, are you Gary? John B, John B, could you mute your video, please? Do you know how to do that? It's up in the upper right-hand corner. There's a video camera. If you just click on that, it'll mute your video. There we go. Okay. Take it away, Gary.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think anybody can see me. My video is disabled.
Okay. We can't see you. No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm Gary Vaughn, Associate Professor of English at the University of Cincinnati, and my presentation is titled, "You Can Take Me Out of Appalachia, but You Can't Take Appalachia Out of Me." I'm not the me in the title. I'm not Appalachian. I was born in Cincinnati. My father and generations before him are Appalachian. Mostly what I'm going to do today is talk to you because my presentation is really about oral tradition and oral narratives, folklore and superstitions and things like that. Well, I'm going to start out first by reading a little to you to give you a broad overview of what I'm doing today. The mid-19th century saw the migration of about 7 million people from Appalachia to northern industrial cities that were seeking to expand their labor force. That's according to AppalachianHistory.net. One of those migrants was my father, who left his large family's farm. By the way, both of my parents came from large families, having like, oh, I forget, around 12 siblings each. So he left his family's farm outside of Somerset, Kentucky in the early 1940s to pursue new opportunities in Cincinnati. After a stint in the Army, he acquired gainful employment as a welder. I remember the snow shovel he had constructed by welding a cast iron handle to a flat piece of cast iron for a plow. That contraption was sturdy, heavy as heck, painful for lifting snow, but powerful for breaking up ice. Although he was very appreciative of the skill he had learned, having won awards for his welding, he came to see that field as having a too limited potential for income growth. But having only a seventh grade education, his opportunities were limited. So he used his extroverted nature to launch a new career as a used car salesman. Working on commission, he found that he could schmooze customers into closing the deal by using his family oral traditions to make himself more relatable, whether by telling clever tall tales to people interested in Appalachia or playing off the Appalachian stereotypes, which is how some Northerners then saw Appalachian immigrants, or migrants to Cincinnati. These, in a sense, understories allowed him, like many other immigrants, to meet the burdens and expectations demanded of strangers in a strange land. I want to continue these understories with a narrative of my father's storytelling performances and continuations of his mother's oral traditions and his father's to demonstrate the rhetorical flexibility involved in language and audience awareness, a flexibility that allows the welding of old traditions with new circumstances, thereby creating a hopeful spot. So, as a used car salesman, my father would not only talk to customers, work with potential customers on the car lot, but he kept a very detailed journal, notebook, with the names of like every customer who he got names from, every customer he sold cars to, and information about them, like their kids' names, their wives, where they worked, what their interests were, and so on. And then periodically, he would call old customers who bought a car from him, a used car from him, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and chat with them on the phone. So I got to hear these conversations. And he would take advantage of um, his Appalachian roots to talk to them in a way that would help him not just make better connections with the customer, but of course to convince them that he was a good person to talk to, that he could be trusted, and so forth. And I remember there were times even when he would say later that the person he had just talked to wasn't even interested in buying another car yet, but by the end of their half hour, sometimes hour conversation, they were more interested. And I think that's partly because they wanted to come and listen to more of his stories. Some of these, of course, well, it's not just stories, but also terminology. Much like apple stack cake, by the way, Lucy, I remember my maternal grandmother making apple stack cake, and I haven't seen one of those since I was a kid. But much like food and um, housing help to form a culture, so do the culture's tales being passed on and the language. I remember, for instance, especially talking with my grandmother in outside of Somerset, Kentucky. A lot of her expressions, like "here a while back," is something she would say a lot, and "highfalutin," or one of my favorite, I think, was "cy goglin." And actually, sometimes I share these little stories with my students. And up until this past fall quarter, none of my students had ever heard some of these, especially Cy Goglin, before. But in fall term, I had a student who was from around Hazard, Kentucky, and she knew exactly what Cy Goglin meant. Um, I also remember, this is kind of significant, well, kind of interesting. Back in the 80s, the Cincinnati Bengals had a quarterback named Boomer. And my father, when he'd be watching TV, a football game, he'd always say, "Boomer, Boomer." And that's a red squirrel. And that's it handed down, I think, that's a common term used in the Carolinas along the mountain areas. Um, some of these things he would pass on to potential customers were even superstitions. One of my favorite was if you carry a pig tooth in your pocket, you won't get a toothache. Um, Another thing was if you see an owl during the daytime, that's an omen of death. Of course, we're probably all familiar with the idea of a horseshoe illustrating good luck, but it has to be placed in a certain way with the ends up. If you place it the opposite way, then you risk having the luck run out. Heavy fog days in October. The number of heavy fog days in October will tell you the number of snowfalls that you can expect in the winter. You've probably heard this one before. This, like many of these, has become more widespread. Aching joints. If your joints ache, that indicates rain coming on. Another one of my favorites is if you're uh, driving down the road or alternately riding in a wagon down the road and you see a black cat crossing the road in front of you, you have to knock 3 times on something before the cat gets to the other side of the road to um, to prevent something negative from happening. Acorns on windowsills. I remember actually my father even did that a few times during storms. Putting an acorn on a windowsill is said to have to prevent lightning strikes in the house. Okay, so moving on then to like particular tales. Um, I know there's a couple that he would tell his customers on the phone or in person. One involved the Brown Mountain Lights, which is kind of a supernatural, spooky tale of lighted orbs being seen in the mountains and woods that allegedly were the souls of wives of Indians who had died in some sort of battle like 200 years, 300 years ago. And there's also a tale about it's got varying names, a vanishing hitchhiker or headless Annie or headless whoever. Sometimes my father would change the name in a particular tale to fit what he knew about the particular customer he was working with. The vanishing hitchhiker, as you might imagine, is about somebody um, driving or riding down a road and seeing a woman hitchhiker. Sometimes she's headless, and this is said to be the ghost or spirit of a person who was either murdered or died in some sort of accident along that roadway. Um, Also, there are a lot, especially from North Carolina, which is where my father's father and grandfather and those many of those before him came from. They came from Stokes County, North Carolina, which is kind of slightly west of north central North Carolina, bordering Henry County, Virginia. My original North American ancestor came to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. And then each succeeding generation kind of gradually moved farther and farther west and into North Carolina. I remember my father being very familiar with what are called jacktails. I'm sure you've heard Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, or of course Jack and the beanstalk that came with settlers from England and Wales, which is where my ancestors are from, to Virginia and the Carolinas. My father would tell those tales to amuse people. And again, he would often adjust the name so it wouldn't necessarily be Jack. He would use the name of a customer's child, for instance. And the Jack tales were good for this because Jack always was kind of like an underdog who would come out on top, would succeed in whatever he was trying to do. Then there's one in particular about uh, Jack being asked by his mother to go out and get a job, make some money. We need some money. So he he went to some local official who told him that there was a wild animal in the mountains, might have been like a cougar or a mountain lion, something like that, and that was scaring away business and other people, and would pay Jack to go out and deal with this monster, with this creature. And so Jack did, and he was able to track down the animal, but then the animal started chasing him. So he ran up a tree, and then the animal started scratching away at the tree until the tree was almost, ready to fall over. The animal got tired and went to sleep, and Jack was up on a thin branch, and the branch broke, and he fell down, landed on the animal, which woke the animal, and the animal got up and started running away with Jack on his back, and ran into town where the official saw them and shot and killed the animal. And Jack pretended to be very angry because what he was going to do was he was training this animal to add to the official's stable of horses and more tame animals. And of course, the official had ruined that for him. And the official was so impressed by his effort that he doubled the money that he gave to Jack. And of course, this was showing Jack's resilience, bravery, and ability to think on the fly. And when my father would, as I said, use a customer's child's name in this story, that evoked, not just great amusement, but it made it a lot more personal and interesting. And many times, um, the listener had no real knowledge of these kinds of jack tales, or that they were called jack tales.
Gary, you have about a minute left, okay?
Okay. So I wanted to quickly then I want to share with you. Here's a photograph of, this is in the front row seated are my paternal great grandparents. He was born in Stokes County, North Carolina, and she was born in Lee County, Virginia. My grandfather is the man standing on the far left, and this is a photo of a um, wedding anniversary celebration taken in 1960 for their 50th wedding anniversary. So I want to end with a story. This is the most interesting thing. Throughout my childhood, whenever my father's family would get together, a lot of times they would use an interesting word called cushaw. And it was kind of like a playful insult, something like knucklehead. He's a cushaw. And when I asked where that came from, what that meant, nobody could really tell me other than that they heard it from their grandfather. Well, it turns out when I got to college, I read a novel by William Gilmore Simms called The Yemassee, which is, well, he called it a romance about a 1715 war with among the British and colonists and Indians. And there's a scene in there are several references in there to Cushaws, which was the name of a very small Indian tribe, which by the end, in the Carolinas, which by the end of the romance um, were extinct, became extinct. So that carrying on of something as specific as that, even without the direct knowledge of where it came from and what it might have originally meant through the generations, is part of the thing, uh, along with the other oral traditions that help create the fabric of a culture, much like food recipes and housing. Okay, I hope that was entertaining for you, and I hope you could see the picture.
We can see the picture. Thank you, Gary. Anybody I have time for one quick question or comment live, or you can write something in the chat. Okay, thanks, Gary. You can unshare your screen now.
Okay.
Greg, I do want to make sure that you're aware that there is a comment in the chat for you from Vanya. So I think it's from Vaughn. So please make sure you check the chat because it looks like it might be something you'd be interested in. So our last presentation today is Evelyn Brewer is presenting. And Evelyn, I believe you're on. If you're on, could you show your video for a second? There she is.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's good to be with you.
Okay. And Gary, you can stop sharing. Oh, I'm sorry. I have you spotlighted. That's not your fault. That's my fault. Hold on a second. This last presentation, like I mentioned, is pre-recorded. So I'm going to share the video, and it's about 23 minutes. So there might be a minute at the end for questions or comments. I'm just going to let the video run, and please feel free to use the chat. Evelyn is here, and she can respond to comments in the chat as well.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Evelyn Brewer, and I'm
stopping to do a sound check. Is everybody hearing the sound?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
To talk about nursing in rural Appalachia from the voice of the registered nurse. Nurses protect health, they promote health, they work as independent agents as well as collaboratively in teams. They build relationships with those that they care for and those that they work with in communities where they both live and they work. Appalachian health, as you probably already know, has disproportionately high rates of socioeconomic disparity. And although we're getting better at that, we're getting better at the lower generalized functional health, we have a higher prevalence of cancer. All these things change, and we know they're changing. But what we don't know is how the role of the nurse is changing. We need good, proficient nurses to take care of the people who live here, but we don't know much about those nurses. We have earlier work that shows us that nurses are considered leaders and they're educators and they're critical to the systems. But when I did earlier work, I found that there was very little current about nurses. And so that's the purpose. That's what stuck in my head. We don't know. The purpose of this study was to interpret and understand the lived experience of contemporary RN practice in rural Appalachia. By the very nature of nursing as a giving profession, the voice of nursing most often reflects those cared for rather than the nurses themselves. So the aims of the study were to understand the lived experience of contemporary nursing practice in rural Appalachia and to understand the relationships, the lived experience of the relationships. For instance, do nurses feel pressured to be on the clock all the time? Because everybody knows they're a nurse and they want advice on personal medical issues at the ball game or at church or at the grocery store. And how does a nurse feel when they see a client in the office for an ailment that's either caused by or exacerbated by unhealthy behaviors, and you know that you've already given evidence-based information about that condition, and it was rejected. So what does it mean? What does it mean to live as a nurse? The focus area was a 6-county region of 3 adjoining states in South Central Appalachia. These states were North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. The primary researcher, myself, lives in Ashe County, North Carolina, and I chose all the surrounding counties to my home county. It is a rural area, even though rurality is hard to define. By the rural-urban continuum codes, all the focus counties for this study met the definition of non-metro areas, and 3 of the 6 focus counties have zip code areas that are included in the frontier and remote area codes. So by definition, it is rural for this in this focus area. The study design, it is a hermeneutic phenomenology study which uses researcher interpretation of text to discover the meaning of a lived experience. My participant pool excluded LPNs. LPNs are nurses, and they're very valuable to the team. But nurse LPNs do not receive the level of practice and education for leadership and professional roles. The baccalaureate nurse is considered to be the professional, the entry-level professional nurse. Even though my study included advanced practice nurses, those advanced practice nurses have a baccalaureate preparation. So that was the rationale for excluding LPNs and including advanced degrees. There was no requirement for native Appalachian because I really understood that the participant pool would include nurses who were working and living in Appalachia because of the changing profile of the region. So I just decided that that would be a better way to go. Recruitment was a little bit problematic because I was a resident. I am a resident, and I practice professional nursing in this area. And so it was likely that I would know or be known of a lot of the participants, and that's a problem that is consistent with rural research. So I chose social marketing as a strategy for recruitment. And that would hopefully limit the influence of common knowledge and the lack of anonymity. Social marketing strategies included asking the state boards of nursing associations to send an email to the members with information about the study. One state approved the marketing strategy, and they sent out an email, and I got 4 participants recruited using that strategy. One state association representative said it was not used in their state, but gave me some contact information for the other representatives, and the final decision was not to use that, not to be part of my recruitment strategy. And the third just didn't respond to my request. So the 4 participants I received from social marketing was a little bit problematic with my sample representativeness, but I had much greater success at recruiting through snowball sampling measures. I just had to take care to avoid pressure on participants and to identify additional participants, and I did not use any kind of incentive because I didn't want to influence participants, especially if they were known to me. So I had 15 participants in all, 5 who knew me, 3 who had heard of me but didn't know me, and 7 who had no knowledge at all. The participants were recruited from 2 of the 3 states, and although the 3rd state didn't produce any participants, I had several participants who lived within a 2-mile line of the state between them. So they went to church in that state. They had friends and family in that state. And I can't assume that their viewpoints were the same, but they certainly had some knowledge of what was prevalent in the other state. So as you can see from this, I had a good broad spectrum of participants. Many of them started out as an LPN and all had additional education. Most of the nurses were older, and so that implies that they hold most of the experience for patient care. And that's a problem, because when they retire, and you know, we have a lot that are retiring, most of the experience goes with them. Although I had a lot of diversity in age and experience in education, I didn't have a lot of diversity in ethnics or racially diverse participants. That's a limitation of my study. But that, while it wasn't intentional, it was a foreseeable result, because the region as a whole of my study is a highly homogeneous region. Data collection was done through semi-structured interviews. I used a digital recorder and field notes and kept a journal. My grand tour question was, what is the lived experience of being a registered nurse in the community where you live? And when I asked that question, a lot of the participants said, So my secondary question was more explanatory, and it said, tell me what it's like to be a nurse in the community where you live. And they started talking. I had 4 themes identified. Embedded in place was a state of being in which one belongs and is connected to the surroundings physically, socially, emotionally, and mentally. And they recognized the implications of that relationship and the role that one holds within that network. There was a theme of ownership, the way participants accepted responsibilities of being a nurse, including limitations and scope of practice. Destined was fulfilling a role dictated or guiding by a force outside of self, and reward is positive personal perceptions of self-worth and value attributed to their fulfillment of the duties of nursing. How they made meaning of what they do and how they felt about being a professional nurse. The first embedded sub-theme was location. It's where the nurse lived and worked. One participant clearly identified the option of being somewhere else and the rationale to return. It was a choice to be a nurse in this area. I could have gone somewhere else, but I chose to come back to this just simply because of family roots. Another participant revealed a rationale for staying and never leaving. It's like when people are born and raised in the area and their families are here and their roots are here and they're staying here because this is where they're from and this is their home. Aesthetic features, the beauty of the nature of the area also was a stimulus for choice. They owned this place here in our neck of the woods. They recognized the limitations. There were limited employment opportunities. It's expensive in some places to buy a home. There are limited infrastructure. As the last quote says, it's just not easy to get anywhere. To get to the highways, the big major highways, you have to go down a hill and on curvy roads and go here, over there. They accepted all of that as embedded in place. The people served as a source of embeddedness. The core groups of people were family, friends, and neighbors, and they held special value for the participants. It's the people that have their old-fashioned ways, their wives' tale. This is our community. They felt like they knew and they were known and they had unity and shared experiences. Down here, everybody's a friend, is friendly. It's just more personal. We've all grown up together. We just raised different, not like city people. They were positive about the relationships in their community. It's that sense of belonging. They acknowledged understanding the never-ending role expectations My work never ended. I really liked that. People knew I was a nurse when I went somewhere. And most times they coped in non-confrontational, socially acceptable ways. One said, I play hide and seek in the store. I'll see people turn around and go the opposite way. It's not that I don't like them. They see you and you're a nurse and they know you know, so you think you should be able to tell them stuff. The culture is embedded in place. Customs form a huge part of the nurses' perceptions. They were challenged to understand and incorporate customs into care. A traditional lack of healthcare engagement was recognized. They've been taught to be self-sufficient, to do things on their own, and they're really private. And another one said, we didn't go to the doctor unless we were dying. Our people don't complain. They're tough. They just are tough and don't complain at all. She just reinforced that. One nurse related how the belief systems were an essential element of being and practice. I don't think I could be an atheist nurse. There's too much proof that God exists. And faith served as a source of hope. We know there's a greater physician. And if the patient's heart is right with the Lord, then there's worse things than death. It's a coping mechanism. If I didn't know that some of these people that passed were saved, I don't know how I would have dealt with it. And then finally, faith was a guiding hand. There's a lot of times I'm on my hands and knees and doing something and I'm saying, Lord, please guide these hands because I don't know if I'm going to do this or not. Embedded in place with connections, the participants found connections in healthcare systems. They liked the continuity of care and found expediency and patient connections formed previously. They don't have to tell me their whole history again. I'm going to remember them. A sense of community involvement and connectedness was identified. We have people at the hospital that live somewhere else part of the year, and they come here because we establish that intimate relationship with our patients. However, the connections that require participants also understand the context of where they are. Just because you're in a small place that looks like it's pretty contained doesn't mean that anything about it's simple. It's very complex and requires a lot of understanding of how those things fit together, work together or not, and try to navigate your way around all of that and just make things work. Ownership of their individual practice. They knew the potential for harm in what they do. You could kill somebody. They found the need for equity regardless of how they felt or the context of care. I may cuss and gripe, but I'll go and take care of them because that's what you do. There was a lack of self-advocacy for the nurses themselves. Nurses are not good at standing up for themselves. We're very good at standing up for our patients, but not for ourselves. And they acknowledged responsibility to the workplace. Rarely do I call in. That's my family, and I know I've got to be there. Sometimes that responsibility conflicted with personal values. For example, one participant discussed strict parental rules on church attendance and how that rule changed. Oh, excuse me. I skipped one. He said, you're going into nursing. That's different. God will forgive you because you're not there every time the doors are open. And most of all, they recognize the degree of investment and responsibility they've undertaken. You need to nurse with your heart, not with your mind, not just with your hands, and definitely not from your pocketbook. The role in the community was a sense of ownership. The nurses saw themselves as members of that community. They understood community relationships, and they were able to navigate those inherent barriers. Let them know you a little bit before you start prying. Unless you do that, they're not going to tell you the truth. They're just going to tell you what you want to hear so that you'll leave. Expectations were different in small communities. You don't have to prove yourself over and over. And expectations were not lower, only more integrated and congruent. People get better care in a community from nurses in the community where they are from. There were physiological factors to being destined. One of the participants said, you know, they just have it in their DNA. And another one said, I really believe it's either in your blood or it's not. I don't think you can make it be there if it's not. Family was a significant functional motivator. Even though there were limitations, my parents were very supportive and encouraging, but at the same time, they didn't really understand. Other participants combined those perspectives. Some of it has to do with how their genetics are and how they're raised and how they have learned to care for people throughout their lives. There were unconscious influences that included faith and inherent personality characteristics. Faith reflects a perception of a higher being that supports, cares for, and directs one's life. One participant said, I just feel like I was called. God works through me. This topic was clearly very emotional for some participants. One started to cry during her comments. I just felt like God really opened the door for me and called me to be a nurse. He gives us, each of us, skills and has a purpose for each one of our lives. Inherent characteristics unconsciously direct one's behavior. One informant said that you needed nursing characteristics pre-existing, and she said, you can teach a monkey how to do anything. You can give a bed bath, but to really give a bed bath, you have to communicate with that patient. And another one said, you know, this person needs to get thicker skin to be a good nurse. She's just a tender-hearted, good kid, but she needs to understand how to take care of herself and then help those others. That's just good qualities of nursing. And the other thing that I found was reward. Reward was a positive personal perception of self-worth and value coming from being a nurse. In other words, how they made meaning of what they do and how they felt about being a personal nurse, professional nurse. One said, it may be a benefit to get paid for what you do, but the reward to me is what I feel on the inside. I go home satisfied at the end of my day. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I made a difference. I'm very thankful to be a nurse. It's been a great life. Some found long-lasting promise. We wonder why on the earth we're suffering and going through this. And the very next day, somebody needs that information. I just think the reward is not only earthly, it's eternal. But through it all, they were realistic. It's challenging, it's wonderful, it's hard, it's tedious, it's everything you expect it to be. There were limitations to my study. It was a small study area, and it was doesn't have very much ability to transfer to other regions. Another limitation is the fact that I live here and worked here for many years, and I didn't limit it to participants who only identified as Appalachian. That's a limitation. But the aim to understand the lived experience of contemporary nursing practice, the nurses expressed ownership of the practice. They recognized the responsibilities inherent to their work, the legal and ethical standards of the profession, and how their personal lives incorporated those concepts within the context of where they worked and they lived. And my second one was to understand the lived experience of relationship between the nurse, employment, and place of residence. And in summary, the nurses found strength in the relationships shared with coworkers, community members, and families. These relationships were the foundation of why they practiced in this area. Even the ones new to the area found support and connection for nursing practice, recognizing the barriers, but also the good things that help them be a strong nurse. Caring, compassion, perceptions of well-being, and contentment. All concepts supported by the rural nursing theory and the theory of human caring. So in summary, the contemporary nursing practice in rural Appalachia is first of all nursing and everything that entails. Rural Appalachia is the context that makes this practice different. Just as Appalachia has similarities and differences with other rural and urban areas in the nation, nurses share similarities and differences. Understanding this diversity makes a stronger practice. Hearing the personal viewpoints validates the objective observations. One may observe the care and attention given during nursing practice, but only the voice of the nurse can give meaning to what is happening, to what is taking place, that the nurse is nursing from the heart. It is a viewpoint and a meaning well heard in this study. Thank you for
So there is not time for questions, but I just want to thank you all for attending this session and to encourage you to attend our opening ceremony and our plenary one, which I think is going to be a very interesting and compelling conversation with some of our more well-known authors affiliated with Appalachian Studies. Also, check out the posters. They're available 24/7, and enjoy the rest of the conference.